very good morning. You're here with us on a brand new episode of Melt. I'm Ritvika Gupta reporting from my home. Now, market research has always played an important role in analyzing consumer attitudes and behavior. But how are companies continuing customer research during the lockdown? We speak to K Ramakrishnan, Managing Director South Asia at Kantar Worldpanel today to understand the challenges of customer research and what marketers need to note while tracking consumer behavior during the pandemic. But before that, Anant Rangaswami, editor of Melt, joins me today. Hi Anant. Does the need and methodology for research change during challenging times like these?
Ritvika, and all the conversations I've had with marketers post-lockdown, it's hardly conversations. It's a lot of questions being thrown around. Marketer asks a question, I ask a question, and everybody is grappling for answers. So we thought it's time to speak to somebody whose business is finding answers to questions. That's why we're talking to Ramki, who's the MD for Kantar in India, and their job is to find answers that all marketers seek.
Well, thanks Anant. Let's have a look at your chat. The conversation today was recorded over Zoom. Our sincere apologies for the patchy stream. On that note, let's get ready to melt with K Ramakrishnan.
Morning, Ramki.
Hi, morning Anant. How are you?
Good to talk to you.
Same here. Yeah.
So, Ramki, to begin with, your business normally involves a lot of analog physical meetings between your researchers and respondents. Now, obviously, these are not possible during the lockdown. So, how are you dealing with the challenges caused by your inability to meet people physically right now?
Yes, getting physically to reach respondents has been a huge challenge. Some of our businesses have taken the route of telephones. So
Right.
we've been able to telephonically reach out to consumers in some cases. And now with the advent of WhatsApp calls gives us some kind of a via media where there's a phone and there's an image as well. And that said, it is still a huge challenge. Some ways in which this challenge I can talk about is that a very large proportion of consumer research, at least in India, is done by FMCG businesses, and that too with housewives. And housewives, by definition, were alone at home, others away at school or college or office or whatever. And so they had enough time to give us. So when the researcher walked in, they could chat up and give as much time as we wanted. And therefore, a lot of exploratory studies were possible. Now, with work from home, beginning a sort of a norm, which means it may not be completely work from home, but I think much more than what it used to be before. There's always somebody at home. So when there's always somebody at home, they need to be attended to. So to that extent, the time on the housewife's hands is under pressure. So to that extent, she's not able to share also. So these are two constraints. One is the physical reach, and second is her time. We're trying to get over it by either telephonically or through WhatsApp calls. And globally, a whole lot of research is trying to make it shift towards digital, which means can we reach them digitally? Can we reach them through the internet and things like that? That's also going on in India. It should have happened long back, if you ask me. The industry has been a little lethargic on that front, but definitely COVID has come and kicked us a little bit on the back, and the movement is now a lot faster. While that is true, the only issue there is the kind of consumers that you're able to reach. I mean, if you're talking about SECA, a digital reach seems imminently possible. But you go lower SECs, first of all, the reach itself, and second of all, even if you reach, it tends to be a little anonymous. And so therefore, it has been a struggle to get respondents and more importantly, to get them to respond.
Right. So do you actually have to poll more people for the same study to allow for incomplete questionnaires, or to allow for questionnaires where the quality standards don't meet your standards?
Yeah, so in general, when we do any research, we do something called as a listing, right? When we go to a whole lot of people, and then we arrive at a certain set of people who meet our criteria of the research, and secondly, who are also willing to talk to us. Now, that listing is an exercise which is much larger in the digital space, right? So you send it to a whole lot of people, and then there is a bunch of people who say yes or whatever. And then we get them to answer. And if there's a shortfall, we go back to that early listing exercise and do that. So you're right, the numbers are bigger in the listing space.
And tell me, does it have a cost implication? Because your physical meetings involve, for example, taxi fares, much more time, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So is there a positive cost implication to you or to somebody commissioning you for research?
It's a little difficult to determine at the moment. For example, I told you telephone has been a nice via media and WhatsApp
Right.
calls. So what happens is the attention span of the consumer over the telephone is limited. If, for example, if you had a 45-minute conversation with a consumer earlier, it's impossible to have that kind of attention on telephone. So to that extent, what happens is we break it up to multiple calls. So those multiple calls lead to multiplicity of costs. So at that point of time, we're not able to judge whether this is cheaper or whatever it is. And when it comes to completely internet kind of thing, like I said, we reach a large set of people, which is anonymous, and then we try to get names out of it and stuff, which takes its own effort and time. So at the moment, not very clear whether it's having a positive impact or not.
Right. Now, let's get from the industry challenges to the present. When I say industry, the research company challenges to the marketer challenges.
Sure.
Now, there are changes in the environment every day, whether it is in terms of distribution, reach, retail availability, customers being allowed to go out and so on.
Yeah.
So research, which earlier was fine, syndicated research, I'd say even a 6 monthly rest is quite meaningless because everything has changed from last week to this week.
Sure.
So how do you address that issue?
Okay, so let me talk about a particular syndicated research called the Household Panel, which tracks purchases of household.
Right.
Now, a whole lot of marketers are very keen to understand what happens when a disruption like this happens. So therefore, it became extremely important for us to keep that study going. So we did that telephonically to actually figure out whether people bought. Some of the startling things came out, like for example, the humongous increase in sanitizers, for example. Right. Just to give you a ballpark number here, the annual penetration of sanitizer was near about 1.5% in 2019. In 2020, we're talking about a monthly penetration of 11%. So you see the multiplication. So that is a huge piece of information. Second, in general in India, the purchase cycle is people buy a lot of stuff during the first week. In the subsequent weeks, it comes down, and there's a slight up in the last week. The very typical week. You go back 3 years, 5 years, whenever it is like that. But during this phase, what happened was, when the lockdown was announced, the third week of March ended up being a huge peak for people's purchases. And that peak, subsequently, right through April, right through May, it's been sort of flat. Every week has been behaving similarly. So those are changes which marketers will find extremely useful to determine their distribution cycles, and the kind of channels that they want to reach out to also. So another good example of this will be, if you take people buying FMCG from pharmacies, right? People buying FMCG from pharmacies has sort of multiplied. It's become 3 times what it was. Now, if I'm a marketer, do I have a skew towards drugstores or pharmacies in my distribution is something that I want to seriously think about. Every marketer has a strategy for modern trade. They have a team for modern trade. But have they ever thought about the poor drugstore is a big question mark. So when whoever has a skew towards the drugstore has been able to gain humongously during this period. So this syndicated study, this kind of a syndicated study kind of helps them understand to navigate through this kind of crisis in terms of behaviors. And so therefore drives them in terms of either distribution or in terms of pack sizes or any of those.
Right. I've been reading about what is happening, like you have, I'm sure, across the world. And, demand for things like, say, toilet paper in the West.
Yeah.
It went from 0 to a peak within a week of the announcement of a lockdown.
Right.
And then it petered out, and now it is back to pre-coronavirus levels or lower.
Right. Right.
So how do you differentiate between the temporary demand and a permanent change in behavior, customer behavior, or customer need or customer want?
Yeah, that's a huge question, Anant. The equivalent of the toilet paper in India, there are several categories. Like, let's take the example of snacking, right?
Right.
In-home snacking has gone through the roof. I mean, huge numbers, huge jumps. Biscuits and stuff like that have seen tremendous increases. Now, these increases, particularly biscuits, one way is to say the market is booming, so therefore let's set the supply chains right, get all the factories in place and stuff like that. At the same time, there is another huge component of this business known as the out-of-home consumption. And the purchases by, let's say, the HoReCa segment, which is hotels, restaurants, cafes, etc. Now, those have come to a complete zero. So whatever was consumed outside is sort of compensated inside homes, and probably a little more than that. So therefore, it's important for marketers to understand where exactly this jump is coming from, or is it coming at the cost of something, and then decide on their way forward rather than straight away jumping saying, okay, this is going through the roof and I'm going to make decisions on the basis of this. Another thing to note is there are some of these trends are likely to stay. Like for example, hand hygiene is not going to go away. Lockdown opens also. Every office, every place is talking about keeping sanitizers and you wash your hands. And the fear in the minds of people continues. And so therefore the general nature of people to have a hand washing habit or use of sanitizers is going to remain. So that's a trend which is probably going to stay. Probably 6 months, probably 8 months, and probably longer. So it's important for marketers to realize which category they are in, and that category is the trend going to stay for longer. And to determine that, they need a lot more sharper insights into why that purchase behavior happened during that period.
So, we just spoke about the kind of changes required to your syndicated research, what you were speaking about your panel.
Yeah.
And then we come to, shall we say, proprietary research.
Custom
research, which some brands and some categories may need. For example, let us say there's somebody who's not in the sanitizer business.
Sure.
And wants to know whether he should get into the sanitizer business because there's an appetite, there's a market boom.
Right.
Are you seeing a lot of requests for custom research now?
So there is a lot of requests for custom research, and the clients are fully aware that physical meeting of consumers is not possible. So what this is leading to is a phase where the skill sets of researchers are being slightly redefined, in the sense that researchers are being asked to, and rightly so, to look at all sources of information that are currently available, not necessarily physical work, asking fresh questions. So we are asked to look at some syndicated stuff like the panel. We are asked to look at the billing data across various depots. We are asked to look at social data. How is this behavior of this consumer been? We are asked to look at what are the kind of trends that influencers are speaking about, and also pin a lot of data in the past. Like for example, has there been a crisis in the past in anywhere in the world? Did that lead to any particular behavior change, and did it last? For example, very, very often people ask us what's happening in China. China is out of it. Has that changed? Secondly, if you look at China during SARS, also they went to something like this. So when they came back, what was the kind of change? So the importance right now from researchers' point of view is to answer questions. The questions are not changing. But the only thing is answering questions not by going again to the consumer and asking fresh questions, but making do with a whole lot of information that is out there, synthesizing it, curating it, and probably giving the answers or the approach to the answers in a succinct way. I think that's where the skill set is being demanded more right now.
Right. Over the last few years, there have been a lot of discussions I've had with CMOs, CTOs, CIOs on who owns the data within a company.
Sure.
For example, there's a mountain of data available. A CMO has no access, for example, to the billing data, maybe in a company. I'm not saying maybe, and so on. Now, for you to be able to do your job well, you need a pipe which brings you data that the customer has, which you can't get through research. The customer has to allow you to use the data, has to give you access to the data.
Right.
So how is that happening? Because there is some third-party data available, which you have access to. There's your panel data.
Right.
But what happens to the customer's proprietary data?
Right. So this is the case where I think the absolute top management comes into play. I mean, I think the absolute top management of most client organizations is now getting involved at this time, saying there is a terrible dearth of information because there's not a lot of physical research that is happening. So we need to make do with this right now, and we need to plan it and channelize it in such a way that it is available, accessible. So that access can be anonymized. Like for example, we need not have to know how much is the growth in from a Wardha depot, but we need to know at least indices wise what is the growth in those places from a billing standpoint. So that information is being shared when the top management gets involved, and they say that, okay, this information needs to be given if we need to get answers. So to a large extent, I think organizations are being progressive in sharing that information to allow us to synthesize it and provide answers.
Now, is there a change in your customer profile? For example, let us say in a pre-coronavirus world, you were answerable fundamentally to, say, the CMO only. Now, is it CIO, CFO, CEO also in that mix?
Yeah, there definitely is, because everyone is grappling with uncertainty. So in the normal course of business, people are so caught up in their daily lives, like a CFO or a CEO perhaps doesn't spend too much time to come towards, let's get a little deeper into insights and stuff like that, because they know that there are a bunch of people who are extremely well equipped to be able to do that. But now with the uncertainty being what it is, they are getting a lot more involved. So we are getting a lot of what we call as the top-to-top meetings, where there is a deep discussion on insights itself, which is perhaps a lot more now, albeit digitally, than we used to in the physical world.
Right. So parts of India will start opening up in bits and bobs.
Right.
So what do you think happens and how will it change? Are you going to stay in this digital first world that you're in, or will you go back to an analog kind of construct in terms of your research and your data gathering and your interviews and so on?
Right. So during this phase of being digital, to some extent, marketers have tasted getting research done digitally. In the sense that when I say tasted, it means that it's much faster. And while the information is not to the point and perfect to the T, it gives pointers. So to some extent, they've kind of started living with that and probably understood that it's perhaps a way to do things. So it may not immediately jump back to saying, I'll go back to my consumers and meet them physically and get that information. We need to find some hybrids in between. Definitely, the digital percentages will grow substantially. And there will be hybrids like the WhatsApp calls, which might help. Like, for example, groups are now happening digitally, in the sense that focus groups, like how we are doing a Zoom call right now, 8-9 people in a Zoom call are participating in focus groups. But the only thing is attention span is an issue, and how do we keep all of them engaged with the conversation, etc., continue to be an issue. But I'm sure, like somebody said, one should never waste a crisis. And I think this crisis will probably lead us to solutions to find ways which may not require physical visits in the future. That said, I think the bigger role that I see for research organizations will get a lot more fundamental, in the sense that there was a time when all of us were talking a lot about techniques. I have this black box and I have this and I input this and I'll get you this information, etc. I don't know if black boxes can continue. I think it's going to be a time when we are talking about first principles. When you're saying, I had these benchmarks in the past. Do those benchmarks hold good even today? Or is it time for me to address it from first principles? Are there new consumption occasions? Are there changes in the way people are coding different categories? I mean, in the sense that when categories are being looked at, what are the lens with which the consumer sees? These are very, very basic questions. Some of them will require physical visits for sure, and it will come back, but not in a hurry. That digital will definitely build up its component in the research world is our belief.
Right. So even in the note that you sent to me earlier, you spoke about first principles.
Yeah.
So do you think it was a bit careless of all research people to move away from first principles? I see it in PR. Everybody is going back to first principles now.
Yeah.
In the whole communication business.
Right.
So should you have moved away from first principles, in the sense that, digital, all these are enablers of getting you access or data faster?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think in a steady state world, I think we tend to move like a cogs in a wheel. It just keeps going. So we don't question what we are doing at any point of time. Only when a crisis comes and hits us, when we say, okay, there are questions to ask at this moment. So that's why I'm talking about first principles. And first principles will call for serious inputs from researchers and research. Let's talk about, let's say, a couple of decades back when, let's say, the liberalization started. That was a disruption. And at that time, companies were forced to get into first principles to figure out what is changing, how is the mindset of consumers changing, because they were so used to getting stuff from a particular brand, particular way. Now there is suddenly a lot of options. Is that changing? That's one. Second, just after demonetization, things happen. So many disruptions happen, and each of those disruptions is a wake-up call for people to get back into first principles. And first principles, in my humble opinion, will remain forever. And it's the duty and it's important, imperative for each of us to keep that at the back of our mind and keep visiting it as often as we can.
Right. Ramki, you said in a lighthearted note that coronavirus gave all of you a kick in the backside. Now, tell me, are you going to relook at the kind of people who work in your company now, in the sense, is a digital native a preferred employee in a research company today as you move towards digitization?
So digital natives certainly are great, but it helps us understand a certain kind of audience for sure. Right. And it's not going to be, we're not saying that we become digital experts. Everyone in the research business has to become digital experts. No, like you rightly said 5 minutes back, it's an enabler, digital. Digital is a medium, is a means of reaching. It still requires the good old fundamental research skill of receiving the information, processing it, curating it, and finding answers from a whole bunch of nebulous information. That is going to require a lot of human skills, and that's going to require a lot of old-fashioned research thinking. So digital will enable, digital natives will come in and help us get that information fast, but it is definitely going to require a whole lot of insighting and perhaps even leading to foresighting from there.
So, Ramki, I'm going to end this conversation with a simple question which requires a detailed answer.
Okay.
Is every disruption a moment of huge opportunity for research companies like yours?
Great question. I by nature am an optimist, so I definitely believe every disruption is a great opportunity because there are new questions to answer. In the sense that in a steady state, what happens is there is a sale that is happening. There may be a new player, temporary blips, and so on. And we've kind of found answers in the past. In the sense that there was a player in the past. What did I do then? There is a benchmark. There is a playbook by which I can operate. Every time there is a disruption, the playbook has to be thrown away. There isn't a playbook. I mean, what playbook will you refer to? Like, let's take the example of, let's say, brand track data itself. Many brands will say, okay, the best top of the mind awareness for a new brand should be so much. Now, is that still valid when the media habits are changing substantially? Let's take another example. Like currently, we're all talking in the case of hygiene being extremely important and health being extremely important. So we will definitely find in many brands, in many categories, putting a hygiene code into everything that they do. Now, is that something that is absolutely required? Is something that research has to answer. So therefore, I certainly believe whenever there is a disruption which leads to past playbooks and benchmarks being thrown away, what is required is the expertise to start from scratch. The expertise to start looking at the consumer from scratch, from their behavior, to understand what do they mean when they behave in a particular way. Studying the behavioral data becomes extremely important for us. And second is to understand why that behavior is happening. And that why is going to be answered by deep-rooted human understanding. And that deep-rooted human understanding can be provided a lot by research organizations. So therefore, I definitely do believe every crisis is a big opportunity for a research organization.
Ramki, thank you so much. It was an incredible conversation. And I hope you'll get the validation of my comment when people call you after they watch this interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anant. As always, it is a pleasure. Lovely chatting with you.
And that was K Ramakrishnan telling us about the changing role of research organizations today. Here are some of the key points he mentioned. Globally, research is making a shift towards digital. Likewise, in India, both research companies and marketers are accelerating the adoption of digital technology for data collection and research development. Marketers need to differentiate between a temporary increase in demand in certain categories, such as snacking, and a permanent long-term shift in consumer behavior, such as hand hygiene. It is important for marketers to know which trends are likely to last far longer. For that, they need sharper insights on purchase behavior. Skill sets of researchers are being redefined today. Researchers are being asked to look at more data sets. Research companies also need to revisit and implement the first principles framework. With that, it's a wrap on this episode of Melt. Do follow us on social media. Our handle is Ready to Melt. You can also stay informed on what's happening in the world of advertising and marketing with our daily Melt update on our website readytomelt.com. And I'll see you next week, same time, same place. Stay safe. Goodbye.